The first time Marcusjan saw a Velthari cry, he knew someone was going to die. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. First contact with the Galactic Federation had been peaceful, even friendly. The rabbit-like Velthari were gentle creatures who lived on garden worlds where the most dangerous predator was something like a space hamster. They'd welcomed humanity with open arms and fluffy ears, delighted to find another species that could appreciate their poetry and art. But humans came from Earth, a death world where everything tried to kill you, from the weather to the wildlife to the very air you breathed. The Federation species called humans Deathworlders with a mixture of fear and respect. Most aliens couldn't even visit Earth without environmental suits and extensive medical support. Marcus had been one of the first human ambassadors to the Velthari homeworld of Fesha Prime. The posting was considered a vacation compared to the harsh diplomatic missions on other worlds. The Velthari were pacifists who hadn't fought a war in over 1,000 years. Their biggest concern was usually whether their flower gardens were getting enough sunlight. That's why the distress call had been so shocking. Marcus was in his quarters aboard the human embassy station orbiting Fesha Prime when the emergency beacon went off. The sound was harsh and alien, designed to cut through any atmosphere or communication system. He'd never heard it before, but every human in the Federation knew what it meant. A Federation species was under attack. He rushed to the communications center where Ambassador Sarah Liu was already coordinating with the Velthari government. The main screen showed Chancellor Silverpaw, the leader of the Velthari Council, and Marcus had never seen the usually calm alien so distraught. Her silver-blue fur was standing on end, and her large golden eyes were wide with terror. Ambassador Liu, Chancellor Silverpaw's voice trembled through the translator. They came from nowhere. Our defense fleet, it's gone. All of it. We've lost contact with 17 colonies in the Outer Rim. Who attacked you? Sarah demanded, her face grim. The Kreth Dominion. They claim we've been harboring fugitives from their justice system. Silverpaw's ears drooped. But we don't even know what they're talking about. We've never had contact with the Kreth before. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The Kreth Dominion was one of the more aggressive species in the Federation, reptilian creatures who believed in expansion through conquest. They'd been quiet for the past few decades, but everyone knew they were building their military strength. How many ships do they have? Sarah asked. Our scouts reported over 200 warships before contact was lost. They're moving toward the core systems. At their current speed, they'll reach Thesha Prime in 3 days. Sarah's face went pale. The Velthari had no military to speak of. Their defense fleet consisted of converted cargo ships with basic shields and communicators. They couldn't even fight off a group of pirates, let alone a full military invasion. We're sending an emergency request to the Federation Council, Sarah said. They'll mobilize the Fleet Defense Force. Ambassador, Chancellor Silverpaw interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. We already sent the request. The Council's response was, they said they would consider our petition for aid at their next scheduled meeting. Marcus felt cold fury wash over him. The next scheduled meeting was in 2 weeks. The Velthari would be extinct by then. What about the other species? Sarah pressed. The Altarians have a decent fleet, and the Centauri. They all gave the same response. They're concerned about the situation and will monitor developments. Silverpaw's ears were flat against her head now. Ambassador Liu, I think they're going to let us die. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could see the realization dawning on Sarah's face. The Federation was built on cooperation and mutual aid, but when push came to shove, none of the other species were willing to risk their own people to save the peaceful Velthari. Except humans. Chancellor, Sarah said finally, how many of your people can you evacuate? Perhaps 10% of our population. Our transport ships are designed for cargo, not passengers. And the outer colonies. Her voice broke. There are billions of our people out there, Ambassador. Billions. Marcus stepped forward. Chancellor, we need to know everything about the Kreth forces. Ship types, weapons, formation patterns. Everything. Silverpaw looked confused. I don't understand. Are you planning to contact them? Try to negotiate? No, Marcus said quietly. We're going to stop them. Sarah gave him a sharp look. Marcus, we can't commit to military action without authorization from Earth Command. The Velthari aren't even official allies yet. Then we better get authorization fast, Marcus replied. Because I'm not going to stand by and watch genocide happen. The next 12 hours were a blur of emergency communications, tactical planning, and desperate diplomacy. Earth Command's response was swift and decisive. Any attack on the Velthari would be considered an act of aggression against humanity's allies. The human fleet was mobilized and en route. But they wouldn't arrive in time. The Kreth vanguard reached the outer colonies 36 hours ahead of schedule. The reports that came back were horrifying. The Kreth weren't just conquering, they were systematically exterminating the Velthari population. Entire cities were being leveled from orbit. Refugee ships were being hunted down and destroyed. Marcus watched the feeds from the embassy station, his hands clenched into fists. Each destroyed ship represented thousands of innocent lives. Children, families, artists, poets, all of them snuffed out because the Kreth had decided they were inconvenient. The main fleet will reach Thesha Prime in 18 hours, Sarah reported. Our ships are still 6 hours behind them. 6 hours. In 6 hours, the Velthari homeworld would be under attack with no one to defend it. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sarah, I need you to do something for me. She looked up from her tactical display. What? I need you to officially record that I'm resigning from the diplomatic service, effective immediately. Her eyes widened. Marcus, what are you planning? As a private citizen, I'm going to steal a ship and go help my friends. You can't be serious. What can one person do against a fleet? Marcus smiled grimly. I'm not just one person. I'm a human. And humans don't abandon their friends. The embassy station had a small fleet of courier ships for diplomatic missions. Marcus chose the fastest one, a sleek vessel called the Stray Dog that could outrun almost anything in the Federation. It wasn't armed, but that was about to change. He'd spent his military service before joining the diplomatic corps as a combat engineer. He knew weapons systems, and more importantly, he knew how to improvise. The Stray Dog's cargo bay was soon filled with improvised explosive devices, electromagnetic pulse generators, and other surprises that would give the Kreth a very unpleasant welcome. As he prepared to depart, Sarah cornered him in the hangar. This is suicide, Marcus. Even if you somehow survive contact with the Kreth fleet, Earth Command will court-martial you for this. Let them try. Marcus sealed his helmet and climbed into the pilot's seat. Someone has to show the galaxy that humans don't abandon their friends. Maybe that someone is me. The Stray Dog launched just as the first Kreth ships appeared on long-range sensors. Marcus plotted a course that would take him through the asteroid belt between the embassy station and Thesha Prime. If he was going to make a difference, he needed to be smart about it. The Kreth fleet was massive, over 300 ships in a standard invasion formation. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels all moving in perfect coordination toward the defenseless Velthari homeworld. At the center of the formation was a massive dreadnought, probably the flagship. Marcus studied the formation through his ship's sensors. The Kreth were disciplined and professional, but they were also arrogant. They weren't expecting any resistance, so their formation was optimized for intimidation rather than defense. That was going to be their first mistake. Marcus guided the Stray Dog through the asteroid belt, using the rocks as cover while he positioned his improvised weapons. The plan was simple: cause as much chaos as possible and hope the human fleet arrived before the Kreth could organize a proper response. The first bomb went off just as the Kreth vanguard entered the asteroid field. Marcus had hidden an electromagnetic pulse device inside a hollowed-out asteroid. When it detonated, it sent a wave of energy through the lead ships, frying their electronics and leaving them dead in space. The Kreth response was immediate and brutal. Weapon batteries opened fire on the asteroid field, pulverizing rocks and sending debris flying in all directions. But Marcus was already moving, using the chaos to position his next surprise. This time it was a shaped charge that punched through the hull of a Kreth cruiser. The ship didn't explode, but it started venting atmosphere and fell out of formation. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before moving to his next target. For the next hour, Marcus played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Kreth fleet. He couldn't destroy their ships outright, but he could damage them, slow them down, and force them to waste time dealing with his attacks. Every minute he bought was another minute for the evacuation ships to escape. But the Kreth were learning. They started sending hunter-killer groups after him, forcing Marcus to use more and more desperate tactics. The stray dog took hit after hit, her hull scarred by laser fire and debris impacts. Finally, Marcus was down to his last few improvised weapons when the Kreth flagship targeted him directly. The dreadnought's main gun could have vaporized a city block, and it was aimed straight at his little courier ship. Marcus closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, then opened them with grim determination. If he was going to die, he'd make it count. He armed his final device, a fusion bomb he'd cobbled together from the ship's power core, and set course directly for the Kreth flagship. The dreadnought's guns fired again and again, but Marcus jinked and weaved through the fire, using every trick he'd learned in combat pilot training. The flagship's point defense systems came online, filling space with energy beams and projectiles. The stray dog's shields failed completely, and her hull began to buckle under the assault. Marcus could taste blood in his mouth and feel the ship breaking apart around him. But he was close now. Close enough. Marcus triggered the fusion bomb and ejected in his emergency pod just as the stray dog slammed into the flagship's hull. The explosion was brilliant and terrible, a miniature sun that carved a massive crater in the dreadnought's armor. The ship didn't die, but it was badly wounded and falling behind the main fleet. As Marcus drifted in his pod, he saw something that made his heart soar. New contacts on the sensor screen, moving fast toward the Kreth fleet. The human task force had arrived early. The first ship to decloak was the UES Retribution, a heavy cruiser that looked like a wedge of black metal and bad intentions. She was followed by 2 destroyers, a carrier, and a dozen smaller vessels. It wasn't a huge fleet by Federation standards, but these were human warships, designed by a species that had spent its entire evolution learning how to kill things. The Kreth fleet immediately shifted formation to meet this new threat. They probably thought they were facing another peaceful Federation species that would fold at the first sign of real violence. They were wrong. The human fleet opened fire at maximum range, their weapons designed to punch through armor and shields that could stop most Federation weapons. The Kreth found themselves facing railguns that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, fusion missiles that could crack a planet, and energy weapons that could melt through their hulls like butter. But the real shock came when the human ships closed to knife-fighting range. Most Federation species fought from a distance, using long-range weapons and hoping to avoid casualties. Humans fought like the predators they were, getting in close where their superior reflexes and aggression could make the difference. The UES Retribution rammed a Kreth battleship, her reinforced hull smashing through the alien vessel's superstructure. As the 2 ships ground together, human boarding parties poured through the breach, carrying weapons that the Kreth had never seen before. Marcus watched through his pod sensors as the human marines carved through the Kreth defenders. These weren't the sterile energy weapons that most Federation species used, these were slug throwers, flame units, and close combat weapons designed to kill in the most efficient way possible. The battle turned into a rout. The Kreth had superior numbers, but humans had superior everything else. Ship by ship, the alien fleet was torn apart by opponents who fought like demons and showed no mercy to those who would commit genocide. Marcus's pod was picked up by the UES Defiance, a destroyer whose crew treated him like a hero. The ship's captain, a woman named Elena Rodriguez, personally debriefed him on the tactical situation. "You bought us the time we needed," she said. "The evacuation ships made it to the jump points, and your attack on the flagship disrupted their command structure. We couldn't have done this without you." Marcus nodded tiredly. "Are the Velthari safe?" "The ones who escaped, yes. But the outer colonies?" She shook her head. "We were too late for them." The final tally was sobering. The Kreth had murdered over 2 billion Velthari before the human fleet arrived. Entire worlds had been sterilized, their populations reduced to ash and radioactive craters. The survivors were traumatized refugees who had lost everything except their lives. But the Kreth had learned an important lesson about humanity. When humans called someone a friend, they meant it. And when you hurt a human's friends, you faced consequences. The Federation Council convened an emergency session to address the incident. Most species were horrified by the violence, both the Kreth genocide and the human response. Some called for sanctions against both sides. Others wanted to expel the humans from the Federation entirely. Marcus was called to testify before the council. He stood in the Great Chamber, looking up at representatives from 100 different species, and told them exactly what he thought of their inaction. "You let billions die because you were afraid," he said. "You hid behind your laws and procedures while innocent people were murdered. And when someone finally stood up to stop it, you called them the problem." The Altarian representative, a crystalline being that communicated through harmonic resonance, chimed disapprovingly. "Violence is never the answer, Ambassador Chen. The Kreth could have been reasoned with, given time." "Time," Marcus repeated. "How much time do you think those 2 billion dead Velthari had?" "The proper channels should have been followed," the Centauri delegate insisted. "The Federation exists to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral action." Marcus laughed bitterly. "The Federation exists to make you feel better about doing nothing. Well, congratulations. You followed your procedures perfectly while an entire species was nearly wiped out." The debate went on for hours, but Marcus had said what he came to say. The Federation could condemn him all they wanted, he'd sleep well knowing he'd done the right thing. In the end, the Council's response was typically bureaucratic. They condemned the Kreth genocide while simultaneously censuring humanity for its excessive response. Trade sanctions were imposed on both species, though the humans didn't particularly care since they'd been mostly self-sufficient anyway. More importantly, the Velthari were granted emergency membership in the Federation and placed under human protection. Any future attacks on Velthari territory would be considered an act of war against humanity. Marcus returned to Earth to face his court-martial. The trial was a formality. He'd technically committed treason by stealing a diplomatic vessel and engaging in unauthorized combat. But he'd also saved the lives of millions of innocent people and prevented a genocide. The military tribunal was in session for less than an hour. Marcus was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to time served. His military rank was restored, and he was offered a promotion to admiral if he'd accept command of the new Joint Species Defense Force. He accepted. The Defense Force was humanity's answer to the Federation's failures. Instead of waiting for committee approval and bureaucratic process, they would respond immediately to threats against peaceful species. Their motto was simple: no one fights alone. Marcus spent the next 2 years building the Defense Force into something that could actually protect people. Human ships formed the core, but they were joined by volunteers from species who believed in action over words. The Velthari provided intelligence and logistics support. The Altarians, despite their pacifist nature, contributed their advanced sensor technology. Even some reformed Kreth joined, disgusted by their own species' actions. The first real test came when the hegemony attacked the Gentle Ones. The Gentle Ones were perhaps the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They were methane breathers who lived in floating cities on gas giant worlds, spending their time creating beautiful music and art. They had no military, no weapons, and no concept of violence. Their idea of conflict resolution was a poetry contest. The hegemony was their exact opposite. They were conquerors who believed that strength was the only virtue that mattered. They'd been expanding their territory for centuries, enslaving weaker species and strip mining their worlds. The Gentle Ones were just their latest target. Marcus received the distress call while he was reviewing fleet deployments aboard his flagship, the UES Determination. The ship was a monster, twice the size of a normal battleship and armed with weapons that could crack moons. But more importantly, it was fast enough to respond to emergencies anywhere in human space. Admiral, his communications officer reported, were receiving an emergency transmission from the Gentle One's homeworld. They're under attack. Marcus was already moving toward the bridge. How many ships? The initial report suggests over 500 hegemony vessels. They're targeting the floating cities directly. 500 ships. Marcus felt his blood run cold. The Gentle Ones had a population of nearly 50 billion, all of them concentrated in vulnerable floating cities. If the hegemony wanted to commit genocide, they could do it in a matter of hours. Signal the fleet, Marcus ordered. All available ships are to jump to the Gentle Ones system immediately. And send a priority message to Earth Command, we're going to war. The response was immediate. Within minutes, over 200 human vessels were en route to the gas giant system. They were joined by allied ships from a dozen different species, all united by the simple belief that genocide was wrong. But they were still outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Determination as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Gentle One system. The tactical display showed the nightmare he'd expected: hundreds of hegemony ships surrounding the gas giant, their weapons firing down at the floating cities. Each flash of light represented thousands of innocent lives snuffed out. Hegemony Fleet, Marcus broadcast on all frequencies, this is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Joint Species Defense Force. You are ordered to cease your attack on the Gentle Ones immediately and withdraw from this system. The response came from a ship that registered as a massive dreadnought at the center of the Hegemony formation. Human Admiral, I am War Commander Vexthal of the Hegemony. The Gentle Ones have been judged weak and unworthy of existence. Their resources will serve the strong. You have no authority here. I have the authority of every decent being in the galaxy, Marcus replied. And I'm giving you one last chance to withdraw before we make you withdraw. Vexthal's laughter was like grinding metal. You are outnumbered, human. Your small fleet cannot stand against the might of the hegemony. Flee now, and we will allow you to live. Marcus smiled grimly. War Commander, you've made 2 mistakes. First, you assumed we came here to fight fair. Second, you hurt our friends. The human fleet opened fire. But this wasn't the desperate last stand that the Kreth had expected. Marcus had learned from that battle. He'd studied hegemony tactics, analyzed their ship designs, and prepared counters for their standard formations. More importantly, he'd brought friends. The Velthari had provided detailed intelligence on hegemony ship weaknesses. The Altarians had shared their shield-penetrating weapons. The reformed Kreth had contributed their knowledge of aggressive fleet tactics. Even the Gentle Ones had helped, providing detailed maps of their system's gravitational anomalies. The battle was brutal but brief. Human ships carved through the hegemony formation like knives through flesh, their weapons specifically designed to counter hegemony armor and shields. Allied vessels provided support, using their specialized equipment to disable enemy ships and rescue survivors. But the real shock came when the human boarding parties went to work. The hegemony had built their entire culture around the idea that strength was everything. They'd never faced an enemy that was stronger than them. Marcus watched through the battle feeds as human marines stormed hegemony vessels. These weren't the cautious, procedure-bound soldiers that most Federation species employed. These were professionals who had trained for this exact scenario, and they showed the hegemony what real strength looked like. The hegemony's war commander Vexthal tried to retreat when it became clear that the battle was lost. His dreadnought broke from formation and attempted to escape to hyperspace, but Marcus had positioned his ships to prevent exactly that. The UES Determination intercepted the fleeing dreadnought and engaged it in single combat. The 2 massive ships exchanged devastating fire, their weapons lighting up the gas giant's atmosphere with brilliant flashes. But the Determination was built by humans, and humans had been building weapons of war for their entire history. The dreadnought's shields failed first, then its armor began to buckle under the assault. Marcus could have destroyed the ship entirely, but he had a better idea. He ordered his marines to board the vessel and capture its command crew. Vexthal was brought before Marcus in chains, his reptilian features twisted with rage and humiliation. You have won this battle, human, he hissed. But the hegemony is vast. We will return with 10 times as many ships. No, Marcus said quietly. You won't. The war commander's eyes widened as he understood what Marcus was really saying. You cannot mean to destroy your entire fleet? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Marcus gestured to the tactical display, which showed the complete destruction of the hegemony forces. But I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you the same choice you gave the gentle ones. Surrender now, and we'll let you live. What followed was the most comprehensive military defeat in galactic history. The hegemony had built their empire on the assumption that no one would fight back. When someone finally did, their entire military structure collapsed like a house of cards. Marcus didn't stop with the fleet. He followed the retreating hegemony forces back to their core worlds, liberating enslaved species and dismantling their military infrastructure. Within 6 months, the hegemony had been reduced from a galactic power to a collection of isolated worlds begging for mercy. The Federation Council was horrified by the scale of the violence, but they couldn't argue with the results. The hegemony had been one of the galaxy's greatest threats, and now they were gone. More importantly, dozens of enslaved species had been freed and were applying for Federation membership. Marcus found himself testifying before the Council again, this time as the commander of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The questioning was hostile, but he was past caring about diplomatic niceties. Admiral Chen, the Centauri delegate, said, "Your actions have destabilized the entire galactic balance of power." The hegemony, whatever their faults, provided a check on other aggressive species. Now they're gone. Good, Marcus replied. They were murderers and slavers. The galaxy is better off without them. But what about the displaced populations? The economic disruption? The power vacuum? Marcus shrugged. We'll figure it out. That's what humans do. The debate continued for hours, but Marcus had more important things to do. The Defense Force was receiving distress calls from across the galaxy. Pirates were attacking merchant vessels. Slavers were raiding isolated colonies. Aggressive species were testing the boundaries of their neighbors. All of them learned the same lesson: when humans called someone a friend, they meant it. And when you hurt a human's friends, you faced consequences. Over the next 5 years, Marcus and the Defense Force fought dozens of campaigns against various threats. They broke up pirate fleets, liberated slave worlds, and deterred aggressive species from starting wars. The galaxy became a safer place, though not necessarily a more peaceful one. The Federation Council eventually stopped complaining about human methods and started quietly asking for their help. When the Slavers' Alliance threatened to attack the peaceful gardeners, the Council suggested that the Defense Force might want to patrol that sector. When the Raider clans began massing for an invasion of the scholarly worlds, the Council recommended increased human presence in the area. Marcus understood the game. The Federation wanted the benefits of human protection without taking responsibility for human methods. They could maintain their moral superiority while letting the barbaric humans do the dirty work. He was fine with that arrangement. The real change came when the Gentle Ones sent a delegation to thank him personally. They arrived on the Determination in a ship that looked like a floating work of art, all graceful curves and musical harmonies. Their leader, a being called Harmony of Distant Stars, spoke in tones that were like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Admiral Chen, Harmony said, "We have come to express our gratitude for your protection of our people. But we have also come to offer our assistance." Marcus was curious. What kind of assistance? We have been studying your species since our rescue. We find humans fascinating. You are warriors, yes, but you fight for others rather than yourselves. This is a rare quality in the galaxy. We fight for our friends, Marcus said simply. Everyone deserves to be safe. Yes. And that is why we wish to join your cause. We cannot fight as you do, but we can contribute in other ways. Our art, our music, our philosophy, these things have power too. They can heal the wounds that war leaves behind. Marcus accepted their offer, and the Gentle Ones became the first non-human species to join the Defense Force as full partners rather than protected allies. They were followed by the Velthari, who had overcome their pacifist nature to become some of the galaxy's finest intelligence operatives. Then came the Altarians, the reformed Kreth, and dozens of other species who believed that strength should be used to protect the weak. But the real test of the Defense Force's resolve came when they faced their greatest challenge yet: the Devourers. The first reports came from the Rim territories, where entire star systems had gone dark. Scout ships sent to investigate found nothing but empty space where planets had once been. At first, the authorities thought it was some kind of natural disaster, perhaps a rogue black hole or a stellar phenomenon. Then a damaged probe returned from the dead zone with footage that chilled the blood of every being who saw it. The Devourers were machines, vast constructs that consumed entire worlds to fuel their own reproduction. They'd been dormant for millennia, but something had awakened them, and now they were eating their way through the galaxy. Marcus watched the probe footage in his private quarters, his face grim. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They weren't conquerors or raiders, they were a force of nature, as unstoppable as a hurricane or an earthquake. They couldn't be negotiated with, bribed, or reasoned with. They could only be stopped. If they could be stopped at all. The Federation Council's response was predictably useless. They formed committees, held hearings, and debated the best course of action while the Devourers continued their advance. Several species had already begun evacuating their Rim territories, creating a massive refugee crisis. Marcus didn't wait for the Council's permission. He mobilized the Defense Force and headed for the Dead Zone, determined to find a way to stop the machines before they could consume the entire galaxy. The first engagement was a disaster. The Devourers' constructs were the size of small moons, their hulls made of some unknown material that shrugged off the most powerful weapons in the human arsenal. They moved with purpose and intelligence, adapting to every tactic the Defense Force threw at them. Marcus lost a quarter of his fleet in the first hour of combat. The survivors retreated to lick their wounds and plan a new approach. Admiral, his science officer reported, "We've analyzed the debris from the Devourer constructs. The material is unlike anything in our databases. It seems to be some kind of programmable matter that can reconfigure itself at the molecular level. Any weaknesses? Possibly. The constructs seem to draw power from a central source, probably located in the core of each machine. If we could find a way to disrupt that power flow." Marcus nodded. "We need to get inside one of them." The plan was suicidal, but it was the only option they had. Marcus personally led a boarding party aboard the fastest ship in the fleet, a prototype vessel called the Shadow Strike that had been designed for stealth operations. Their mission was to penetrate a Devourer construct and locate its power source. The insertion was a nightmare. The construct's defenses were designed to stop everything from asteroids to energy weapons, but they weren't prepared for something as small and fast as the Shadow Strike. The ship slipped through the mechanical defenses and landed in what appeared to be a processing bay. Marcus and his team fought their way through corridors filled with mechanical horrors. The Devourers' internal defenses were as alien as their external ones: swarms of spider-like robots, energy fields that could disintegrate matter, and traps that defied understanding. But humans were adaptable. They'd been fighting impossible odds for their entire evolutionary history, and they'd gotten very good at finding ways to win. Marcus's team used every trick they knew, from improvised explosives to psychological warfare. Finally, they reached the construct's core, a massive chamber containing something that looked like a crystalline heart. It pulsed with energy, and Marcus could feel the power radiating from it even through his armor. "That's it," his science officer breathed. "That's what's powering the whole thing." Marcus planted every explosive device they had around the crystal and started the countdown. As they ran for their extraction point, the construct began to shake and convulse. The crystal was overloading, and the feedback was tearing the machine apart from the inside. They barely made it back to the Shadow Strike before the construct exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion was so massive that it created a temporary star, visible from several light years away. One down. Thousands to go. But Marcus had learned something important from the mission. The Devourers weren't invincible. They were just very, very hard to kill. And if there was one thing humans were good at, it was finding new ways to kill things. The war against the Devourers lasted 3 years. It was the bloodiest conflict in galactic history, with entire fleets being sacrificed to stop even a single construct. But humanity and their allies refused to give up. they developed new weapons, new tactics, and new ways to fight an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. The turning point came when the Gentle Ones made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in their ancient archives was a reference to the Devourers' creators, a species called the Builders who had vanished millions of years ago. According to the records, the Builders had created the Devourers as a terraforming system, designed to break down dead worlds and use the material to build new ones. But something had gone wrong. The Devourers had malfunctioned, turning from creators into destroyers. The Builders had tried to shut them down, but they'd been consumed by their own creations. The records also contained something even more valuable: the shutdown codes. Marcus led a massive fleet to the Devourers' primary nexus, a construct the size of a small planet that seemed to be coordinating the others. The battle was fierce, with the defense force throwing everything they had at the machine's defenses. Ships were destroyed by the dozen, but Marcus pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their only chance. Finally, a small team managed to penetrate the nexus and upload the shutdown codes. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, Devourer constructs simply stopped, their endless hunger finally satisfied. The machines that had threatened to consume all life in the galaxy were now nothing more than derelict hulks. The victory celebration lasted for weeks. Species that had been enemies for centuries came together to honor the sacrifice of those who had died fighting the Devourers. The Defense Force was officially recognized as the galaxy's protectors, and Marcus was awarded the highest honors that a dozen different species could bestow. But Marcus himself was more subdued. He'd seen too much war, lost too many friends, and made too many hard choices. He was tired of being the galaxy's sword and shield. He wanted to be something else. He found his answer in an unexpected place. The Velthari had established a new colony on a world they called Haven, a place where refugees from all the wars could come to rebuild their lives. It was a peaceful world, with rolling hills and gentle streams, where former enemies could learn to live together. Marcus retired from the Defense Force and accepted a position as Haven's administrator. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was important. Instead of fighting wars, he was helping to heal the wounds they left behind. The colony grew quickly, attracting beings from across the galaxy who were tired of conflict. Former hegemony soldiers worked alongside liberated slaves. Kreth warriors taught combat skills to peaceful species who had learned the hard way that sometimes violence was necessary. Gentle Ones provided counseling and art therapy to those traumatized by war. Marcus found peace in the work. For the first time in years, he was building something instead of destroying it. He was creating a place where the galaxy's children could grow up without fear. But peace was a fragile thing, and there were always those who would threaten it. The attack came without warning. A fleet of unknown ships dropped out of hyperspace and began bombarding Haven cities. The attackers were a species called the Purists, fanatics who believed that the galaxy should be cleansed.